Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Brett Gilbert at the Kodog School of Business at American University, and I was delighted that I was able to be here this afternoon. It's actually happenstance. I was working with Muthu this week, and mentioned that they were having this anniversary celebration. So they invited me along, and then asked me to be the panel chair. So I'm like, okay, sure. Alrighty. So today we're going to be talking about the future of innovation and entrepreneurship studies, and we have three panelists with us this afternoon. Professor Martin Meyer from the University of Vaasa is here. We have Professor Tim Vorley online, and then we have Professor Muthu De Silva. Unfortunately, the other two speakers are not able to join us. So, without further ado, I will go ahead and get started with our questions for this afternoon.
Elvira, so until we find it. So Elvira, she's on her way from Manchester to here, but then her train is cancelled. So she's trying to find a place, if she could, to join online. So yeah, she's sending screenshots. So she's in a chaos right now.
Okay, so our first question is, in your field, what has been the most exciting developments in entrepreneurship and innovation studies in the last 15 years, and where have you contributed? We'll start with the professor.
Thank you so much. I think most of us have been engaged in innovation and entrepreneurship research, not just for 15 years, but for decades. And I think we have lost sight of the fact that innovation and entrepreneurship actually is a very young discipline in terms of academic departments, in terms of business schools. And over the lifetime of CIMR, I think we should actually celebrate the fact that innovation and entrepreneurship have now become a part of the business school curriculum, of the business school research agenda, and they have now become fully fledged disciplines in the world we are operating in. This is the fact that I think we lose sight of, having worked in this and having been pioneers in these areas ourselves. And I think this is where I think we should give ourselves a round of applause for what we have accomplished. I think on a personal side, I think I've worked as a head of department in the early 2000s when CIMR was set up, and as a business dean later in schools where I tended to be the first professor of innovation, and where I had the opportunity to appoint more people in innovation and entrepreneurship. And that's part of the journey we have witnessed in our own institutions, and I think CIMR stands out for this very institution and the impact it has had. I think another aspect that we sometimes as innovation researchers feel is old wine in new bottles. Everyone is speaking about ecosystems now. The broad disciplines in business and management, strategy, well, you name it. Everywhere are ecosystems, social capital. People in innovation research, they need to think back 3 to 4 decades when these ideas came first up. And I think, again, we and the center have played a role in bringing this out a little bit more. And I think this is something we can be proud of ourselves. Thirdly, the dean spoke so eloquently about all issues related to EDI being a hallmark of Birkbeck and also of CIMR. And I think, who doesn't speak about sustainability nowadays? 15, 20 years back, who spoke about that then? Not that many people. We all need to map our research by Sustainable Development Goals. And I think this is a true step change that I think we as innovation and entrepreneurship researchers have had a role in pushing forward. And I think this is where we can also congratulate ourselves. The journey is far from over. The planet is still in need of saving, but we have made a modest contribution in that direction, I find. And I think that's something worth reflecting on a day like this. Thank you.
Thank you. And so perhaps starting from what Martin said about sustainability and looking at digitalization, like we talk about all these things, equality, diversity. So I think for me, the way the field has moved forward is to better understand together how we could achieve some common goals. Like, for instance, sustainability is not something that we can achieve within our separate organizational boundaries. But then how can we work together? So especially with respect to entrepreneurship and innovation, we could see different types of entrepreneurs. So that's something that has happened over the years, like starting from startup entrepreneurship, then looking at corporate entrepreneurship. Then we developed academic entrepreneurship, and we are talking about public administration, public entrepreneurship. And we talked about intermediaries, entrepreneurship, civil society, citizen entrepreneurship. So that's something that has happening over the years. And then in order to achieve some of the common objectives, how can these different types of entrepreneurs work together? That's where here the question asks about our own contribution. So that's where my own contribution is, like in co-creation, how we could capitalize on specific strengths of these different types of entrepreneurs in trying to achieve a common goal. For instance, Tim is there. So we have Innovation and Research Caucus, and we try to work with UKRI, social scientists, and also other stakeholders to better articulate how to capitalize on our funding landscape, how to make sure that our funding landscape, the UKRI's contribution, generates both social and business value. So an area we work on is co-creation. So I think that is an area that we have been seeing changing over time and also bringing entrepreneurship and innovation together. So this is an area I tend to contribute, and perhaps we could discuss more in follow-up questions.
Tim, we'll turn things over to you.
Well, I suppose really kind of my comments build on what both Martin and Muthu have said there. I think that years ago, I suppose I tried to position myself as a kind of an engaged academic. And I think that the question now is that who is not an engaged academic when it comes to the entrepreneurship and innovation space. And I think that shows that there's been tremendous kind of development and a commitment of scholars working in this area to reach out and work with policymakers, to be working with intermediaries. And Helen, in her opening remarks there, talked about kind of the nature of engaged scholarship. And I think engaged innovation scholarship is very much where it's at the moment, that ability to not just sit there behind a desk in an ivory tower looking at data sets and understanding kind of permutations and trends in intellectual property, but actually shift has seen us really move from doing research on organizations or government to doing research in organizations and government. And I think, as Muthu said, with the new Innovation and Research Caucus, it's now very much about doing research with them. And that co-creation point is hugely important. And I think that, as well as kind of patting ourselves on the back and recognizing that there has been this step change in research, in methods, in commitment, in engagement, there's also been an opening up of our partners to be able to let us do this kind of work. And I think that has been fundamental in moving us to this kind of new era in innovation and entrepreneurship studies. And I completely agree with Martin that the timeline is incredibly short. And I suppose the one thing just to reflect on that I think kind of is in our interest there is that we are an extremely interdisciplinary field. And I think that that interdisciplinarity is an absolute strength and means that business schools, the innovation and entrepreneurship as a subject area in particular, is well placed to convene others. And I think that that convening space is something that we've really seen come to light. And I think, yeah, when I contributed to the session, which was very early on in the days around the then emergent, now defunct industrial strategy, it was very much about trying to do this in partnership, and particularly the role of many of those of you in the room and others that are linked to CIMR in terms of trying to create that space for these dialogues to happen, to be able to see that developed over time. And I think that that's fundamental to seeing us where we are today.
Very much. So we've heard a little bit about some of the broader macro trends in terms of the institutionalization of these areas within business schools and some of the specific exciting topics that are happening. And so I was wondering if you all could also speak about some of the most promising and exciting trends that you're seeing in the field. And in particular, what are some things that we still don't know in the areas that you do research in?
Oh yeah, so thanks, Brett. So especially talking about something that we don't know, but still there are the ongoing research in this area. So I would look at it in 3 dimensions. The first is the context. So if I go back to the co-creation that I talk about, so in terms of thinking about different contexts in which we could apply the theories of co-creation to better understand how to capitalize on opportunities that we cannot capitalize on within our single organizational boundary. So one example is, for instance, sustainability, and another example is digitalization. So when it comes to sustainability, so I work with the OECD to understand how universities and businesses could co-create to achieve green transition related objectives. So there is a trend to better understand what is the role of universities in such co-creation projects, and how universities and businesses should carefully think about what are the objectives that we should be achieving through co-creation, what are the objectives that we should be achieving through other forms of innovation, like internal R&D, knowledge transfer, knowledge exchange. So we have to be very careful. Even though co-creation looks like really lucrative mechanism, it's not easy. It takes time. It's costly. So in terms of application to different contexts, the way in which we look at sustainability and co-creation would be different from digitalization and co-creation. Because for digitalization, we look at different actors, different mechanisms of working together. So there are gaps in our understanding how to use digitalization for co-creation and how to co-create in the digital era. So it's really important that we look into these elements, as Tim and Martin say, work with our stakeholders rather than working for our stakeholders, work with them to better understand what we can do in these different contexts. So that's context is one. The second, actors. Yes, we have a good understanding of how the traditional actors of ecosystem work together, but we lack our understanding of some of the non-traditional actors and what are their roles in the co-creation area. For instance, with Brett, we have been working together very hard during this week. What is the role of immigrants in relation to co-creating solutions to the problems that we could see in the home country? That means the country from which they immigrate. So, but then they have a really good understanding of the home country, and they know the network, and they know the problems. They have that credibility and legitimacy that they want to do something in that country. So what is their role, and how can they deliver better regional innovation? So we don't know much about these things. So these are non-traditional actors. What is their role? And third, I look at it as how we could use our known theoretical concepts, it's quite theoretical sides, theoretical concepts in the co-creation domain, like for instance, dynamic capabilities. So different actors may need different dynamic capabilities. and the dynamic capabilities may change over the life cycle of co-creation. So we lack our knowledge in these areas, how to use resources and intellectual property. Like I work very closely with Nicola. So how can we use intellectual property rights in co-creation life cycle? So initially, the way we use IP might be different from the way we use IP at a later stage. And also the paradox theories. So there are different theories and also ethics. Something that we haven't touched on co-creation is like we could look at integrated social kind of contract theory, like ethically related theoretical concepts. How can we add those things or consider those things in the context of co-creation? So these are super important. So 3 things: the context, apply co-creation to different contexts, actors, looking at the role of different actors, and then third, think about known theories and apply it into the co-creation context, and then further enhance our understanding of those theories while also contributing to policymakers and practitioners. I'll stop there.
I agree with everything that Muthu has said, sir. And I feel theory-driven research is really important. What I want to highlight are the opportunity that have come about in the last 15 to 20 years in terms of methods, sir. And I think that can also make a hugely important contribution. And I'm sure we will speak in the second session more about this as well. Social science in which we are engaged has become big science, right, sir? Over the last 10, 15 years, we have been given as researchers access to open source data. We have been given new analytical tools to analyze large-scale data sets. This all is an opportunity to develop new insights. When I started out in my research area, which is bibliometrics, looking at how researchers work together and how innovations come about in science and technology, we had to access database through disks that we had to insert in the computer. The generation before me, they had to go through catalogs and counts. And now you could just download or access a platform and then get a collaboration network within 5 minutes. Think of where this will be going. Think about the big research opportunities that come about. Think also who might get more easy access to research data and how this might be subject to all sorts of interpretation. I think this is where we might have a responsibility to the wider public to help them understand and appreciate the advantages and the challenges with the research tools we make so easily available now. I think that will be an important point. Think about the arrival of AI. Everybody has heard it. Everybody tries ChatGPT and the more advanced tools, large language models. Everything seems so easy. You can prepare a talk within 5 minutes now, right? Not quite, not yet, but maybe a bit in the future. I think that is quite important to note. I've done some research about spotting weak signals in terms of where are paradigms beginning, the new ones, in terms initially on nanotechnology, now on other opportunities. And this was rather cumbersome 15 years ago. It is still not that straightforward right now, but think what the new tools that are being developed can do now in terms of spotting and mapping potential pathways. I think this is something that mustn't be underestimated. I think talking about data again, to do great research, to get into the right kind of journals, you need to have almost always now big data sets in the right kind of areas. So while access to data and analysis to the broader public becomes in many ways more straightforward. Barriers to entry for researchers in certain disciplines actually are, you need to be part of a rather well-defined community. And I think this is something that we need to find ways about how to access this data, how to make it accessible to the wider research community. And there, new programs and initiatives, maybe what you, Muthu, and Tim are doing, might be a way forward to address it. So that's what I think.
Tim, turn it over to you.
Yeah, a lot of what I've got to say is very kind of similar to what's already been said by Martin and Muthu. I guess the point that Martin made about methods, the methods are evolving now quicker than many of us can learn the methodologies, especially the kind of coding side of it. And through the Innovation Caucus, we found ourselves, to come back to my earlier point on interdisciplinarity, working across with computer scientists, working with those that are much more accustomed to coding within their research in order to help us really kind of reduce the number of known unknowns in innovation research. And I think that for me, that's a really exciting opportunity, and it's also a challenging one. It means that we as social scientist researchers need to evolve the way that we think and where we add value to much of this. And I very much feel that we have the ability, like I said earlier, to convene much of this, but the answers do need, as Muthu's alluded to there, to be co-created. Some of the work that we're doing through the Innovation Caucus has been applying AI and using machine learning to try and understand more about the applicants and who are the innovators, where are they coming from, what are their backgrounds, looking at age, looking at gender, looking at ethnicity in a way that simply we couldn't have done kind of 5 years ago, let alone 10 or 15. And I think that becomes really exciting. I think the world that we're living in, as it becomes even more data intensive, it also opens up new possibilities as data sets are both deliberately and inadvertently created. And again, much of this is very much open. So thinking about the likes of Crunchbase, how we can use that as an alternative to looking at intellectual property to understand where investments are being made. But I think the other interesting thing there is also what that means for the future of different and emergent industrial fields. Where are they? Where are they going? What's converging? And I really think that it's that kind of focus that we as social scientists, we need to bring that kind of analytical rigor and that theory-driven side to really ensure that these insights are not just kind of glibly thrown around, but actually when we are talking to policymakers, when we are talking to decision makers, that they understand the evidence. And I think that one part of that is very much on our analysis. I think the other part of it is on the interpretation and the understanding of that. How do we build that among the communities that we work with? Certainly the work that Muthu is now involved with Innovate UK, ESRC and UKRI, we spend a lot of time with them using our social science expertise differently to help think about what really is the question that we're trying to answer, because the answer and the insight that's often required in terms of evidence for better policy or looking at interventions to support innovation, it's not just in the data. It's about much more than being in the data, and how we distill that and how we work is absolutely key moving forward. So I think that absolutely on the same page as my co-panelists on this one. But I do think that the best is yet to come. I think that what we're seeing is an acceleration here, and I think that we need to manage that. We need to kind of work with the data as it becomes available. We need to be open to new methods, but we really need to continue to kind of be forging that interdisciplinary approach. We need to be working with others and recognizing that their disciplines bring strength to ours. And I think that will always see innovation and entrepreneurship research well placed as we move into the future.
Great. Thank you very much. So I think we've heard our speakers talk a lot about, having academics adapting their thinking, looking at new methods, co-creating, coming up with new solutions, thinking about co-creation in different contexts, with different actors, and also integrating a lot of the current theoretical perspectives into how we're thinking about creation in general. So thank you all for those contributions. My next question for you all, and we're going to start with you this time, Tim, just to give you a heads up on that. So my next question has to do with the extent to which the collaborations with policymakers and practitioners really are seminal in the field that you work in. So Tim, we'll start with you.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I mean, if you look at the civic agenda in universities, it really is as old as some universities are. So, I mean, looking at places like Birmingham, they were created very much with that kind of civic ambition in mind. And I think that the nature of engagement, whether civic and looking at regional and local or kind of more national engagement, it's certainly kind of been in and out of favor over a long time. But I think that it has been recognized over the past kind of 15 years in that kind of CIMR window that there is a value here. And I think it's understanding how we articulate that value and how it's expressed, and not losing the fact that we might all be talking in the kind of the same language here, but actually we can take away very different things. So for me, I mean, the engagement is absolutely at the heart, certainly of a lot of what I do, and a lot of those in the room as well. But I think that the way that we do that, I think, is where it becomes seminal. I think we are pushing how we engage, the terms of that engagement, what is the outcome of that engagement, how are the insights gleaned from that engagement applied. And I think that for me is what is really exciting. I think we are seeing that change. We're seeing that openness. We're seeing a willingness to learn from each other. And really, I think that that's what we need to continue. We need to be able to demonstrate that value added. And that value added has to be both ways. It's not simply about providing insights to policy. It's about opening up that policy world, that ecosystem, to try and help us understand that better from an academic perspective. And then it becomes this virtuous circle. So I think that on reflection, that the nature of policy engagement is perhaps not the kind of the seminal article, but actually I think the nature of how it's evolving and changing really is.
I think that resonates with me, what Tim says. I wouldn't necessarily be able to point to a particular instance of collaboration, but thinking back, a lot of my work has been funded now over 20 to 30 years by Nordic countries, government bodies. And I think that has been a very fruitful collaboration. What I've seen in Sweden, Finland, Norway, and also Denmark is a degree of openness to experiments. And whether that we spoke earlier about ecosystems, right? I think this was picked up by policymakers in the Nordics quite early. In Sweden, there was an innovation works agency that tried to implement thoughts of the triple helix university industry government relationship framework about 20 years ago. In Finland, in Norway, and a little earlier even in Sweden, you have seen efforts at user-driven innovation centers. Now, well, the funders look at transformative and inclusive innovation policies. And often what we see up there is that's actually the government actors in the innovation policy arena that try to push the envelope, give us tasks to move things forward. And in many ways, a big challenge, and on the other hand, very rewarding, is that there are funding agencies that wouldn't accept research proposals unless there is a very, very strong framework put in place for policy learning and engagement. And I think this is something that I wasn't aware of was happening 25 years ago. I think that is something special. That is something different and quite a recent development. We see ourselves as researchers often at the forefront of these developments, but I also believe we need to be responsive and receptive to some ideas that come from the policy, the arena of society. I think we haven't invented sustainable development goals. This is a big process that involved multiple stakeholders. We try to find ways of addressing that. And I think we need to become increasingly open towards picking up challenges and phenomena that are important to solve. And I think this way there is a more, interactive process going forward that we didn't have 20, 30 years ago before a center like CIMR.
Yeah, so exactly building on what Tim and Martin said, perhaps I will go into a little bit of more kind of examples. So Dil said that the 3 is the magic number. Let me pick 3 examples, if that is okay. So the first thing, something we traditionally used to do, we conduct research and then we come up with some recommendations for practitioners and policies. So that has been the usual thing that we have been doing. Like for instance, Nicola, myself and Federica, we work on a paper where we looked at how firms use their objectives to generate certain types of capital as a way in which they structure their collaborations with universities. And then we try to come up with some recommendations to firms. So that's a traditional way that we have been doing it. But it's really useful because we try to bring a lot of data and to come up with really good recommendations. And then moving from that point, nowadays we are seeing like what we are doing with Tim, the Innovation and Research Caucus, we are working with our stakeholders now with UKRI, ESRC, Innovate UK, and also other social scientists and relevant stakeholders, even to define the proposal. So for instance, I hope you don't mind me mentioning, like we were struggling to develop co-creation theme, but then Tim came up with this genius idea. Let's have a workshop with our stakeholders. So we brought all the stakeholders together, and then we initially kind of came up with very rough ideas. This is what we might be able to do. And all of a sudden, there was a huge interest came from our stakeholders, and they came up with a lot of ideas. Okay, this is the way we do, and these are super interesting examples. This is the way as to how, if you do the work in this way, it will really benefit policy. And so that's at the point of forming our proposal. So it works so well. And then we realized, especially in the context of UKRI, they are thinking about co-creation. They are doing co-creation. But something that we lack is to bring all these examples together and to share best practice and understanding what works well, what doesn't work well, and to how can we make sure from strategy formulation at the UKRI until the point of delivery, co-creation plays a role. And as Martin correctly said, nowadays, it's not only about delivering something to practitioners or policymakers, but policymakers are co-creating with us. So for instance, what they said was, in funded projects, UKRI works as co-creator. So that's what happened in IRC project. So then what it means is the solutions that we come up with, the recommendation we come up with, would add value to practitioners and policymakers. And it's really great for us as well as academics, because what this means is it will offer us really good database that we will have the opportunity to publish in really good journals as well. And also we could showcase impact Because otherwise we will send 1,000 pages of theses or articles, or maybe 30 pages of articles no one can read, and then ask policymakers to use. Well, I feel sorry for them. How can they use it? And also thinking about new methods of engagement, as both Tim and Martin was talking about. In that example, with the IRC, we were thinking the output will not be a journal article. That's the first thing we say. Don't worry, we are not going to send you journal articles. It would be more engaged based off working with you, like having workshops and coming up with recommendations. Don't worry, these won't be very long reports, maybe just 1 or 2 pages with key recommendations. And so that's how the things are evolving, and that's how we collaborate with, let's say, policymakers. And third example about the OECD work that I do. And again, with member states, we work together to develop the proposal, and then we go into the field, gather data, and to check, and then work with the practitioners as to how we could communicate some of the problems to policymakers, how that would help both practitioners and policymakers. So we as academics have that role of being an intermediary as well, like kind of bringing or communicating all these insights back and forth. So I think that's a knowledge exchange. So these are my kind of 3 examples. One, starting with traditional role that we used to play, and second, thinking about more collaborative role where we work with the beneficiaries, in this case, policymakers, and kind of work with them throughout the project, since inception until the delivery. And a third, again, it's a more international case, how we work with both policymakers and practitioners, also act as an intermediary, kind of sharing their knowledge and their needs. So I'll stop there. Thanks, Brett.
Can I just come in on that point? Because I think that one of the things that kind of Muthu said about the co-creation that really kind of, I think is really important is it's the co-creation, but also the co-ownership of what comes from the projects. And I think that the motivations to co-create and often the language of co-creation is something that is very new in these communities. It's working together where there is a kind of a shared and common interest, but actually it's the outcomes from this work. So the output might be a paper, a briefing, a presentation, all of which are perfectly valid. But actually they need to be able to take that forward, potentially with the academic collaborators or co-creators, but on occasion independently. So that co-ownership from the get-go becomes so important. And the example that Muthu gave, I don't think it's just the workshop. I think that through the workshop, Muthu and our other colleague at Brookes, Lauren Tuckerman, it was very much about trying to understand what the partner wanted to own and how that was going to help move policy thinking forward. And I think that sometimes that makes our role, and I often kind of use the phrase that we are the critical friend. We are the ones that are in a privileged position working in universities, and it may not always feel like that, but I think that it is that ability to be able to interject and to have those conversations and then be that catalyst to change. And I think that's what I find so exciting about my role in the Innovation Caucus, working with people like Muthu, Helen, Martin, and others in the room. I saw John Potter kind of wander into the room earlier, and I have to say that one of the OECD trips that I did with John was so informative of how I approach things and the way that I work, that actually you're always learning as well. So it's not like, and as great as it is to be on this panel, and I'm honored, and I should have said thank you for letting me dial in because I can't be with you, but it is that sense that we're all learning all of the time. And I think that it is a great group to be able to learn from. And it is keep trying to grow and extend that group to make sure that we keep pushing those boundaries.
I totally agree with Tim. Thanks, Tim.
I think one of the things that I appreciated about what each of the speakers said was just how the value add really does come from the collaboration, that it's really critical to have all of the parties coming together and contributing in order to have any kind of value added output. So all through those comments. I do have one final question that I would like to ask, and then we'll open the floor up for questions from you all. So my question is, how do you all incorporate this work into the teaching that you do? So maybe we can start with Tim, and then we'll come back.
So, like Martin, I suppose that I've held different roles, and I've got the pleasure at the moment of leading Oxford Brookes Business School, and we've really tried to rethink our educational strategy. And I remember being interviewed for the role, and one of the things that I described the business school at Oxford Brookes as was a sleeping giant. It had the ability to make so much more impact in regional policy making communities, regional stakeholder communities more broadly, and certainly kind of nationally. And I think it's about kind of building that expertise from the people that we have, and trying then to see them take that through into their teaching. And the way that we've done that is by thinking about golden threads that run through the teaching. So we talk a lot about experiential learning. So that means bringing innovators into the classroom, entrepreneurs into the classroom, and policymakers into the classroom, and working in a way where we have real-time challenges that the students respond to at all levels, whether that is undergraduate or post-experience. It's about thinking about what innovation means to their future, so embracing the technology. So again, one of the things that we've done is to invest in facilities that allow students to play with, in a kind of a sandbox environment, machine learning, using different forms of AI, because they're going to be using it when they leave the university. So the days of trying to police ChatGPT and essay submission are so far behind us that it's ridiculous. And actually it's trying to say, well, how do you use ChatGPT effectively? And then let's critique it together. Let's think about it. So we've got colleagues that are doing that kind of thing. And that kind of plays into the role of innovation and employability. And a phrase that we use is also around work readiness. How do we kind of get people to bring those research insights, which are often by their very nature at the cutting edge, and feed that into the teaching, which then really gives our students and our learners that ability to kind of think about where research is going to be leading wider society. So how are organizations responding to the research that we're doing, and really then kind of allowing them to be on the front foot as they move their careers beyond university.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a really great question, and also building on what Tim said about the teaching techniques. And I think something then we have changed our teaching techniques dramatically, like initially having very linear approach of teaching towards working together, and also bringing a lot of stakeholders to the class. Well, Joy knows and Helen knows, recently we received Vice Chancellor's Award for our entrepreneurial teaching. That's because we adopt a lot of unique and really interesting techniques. So we bring our entrepreneurs, as Tim said, entrepreneurs, innovators, policymakers to the class. They not only share their knowledge, but also they work with students. So one example is that an entrepreneur comes to the class, and then entrepreneur talks about a challenge, the real world challenge the entrepreneur faces. And then the entrepreneur works with our students to resolve or come up with solutions to that challenge. And then the entrepreneurs who came to the class were very happy, because they say that even the solutions the students came up with were mind-blowing. They haven't thought about certain areas. And also it gave a real great confidence to our students. They thought that, oh, I never thought that I had the ability to come up with that solution, that kind of a solution. So it was really win-win. As a lecturer, like it was really win-win for me as well. I always tell my students, I learned from you. So in the class, so it's so fascinating how we bring all these elements together. And Saverio, I know that you bring a lot of people to the class, and also you work on digitalization area, and you bring panels to the class, and also we sometimes bring investors to the class, and then they decide to fund our student projects. And it's such a change has happened, as Tim said, to teaching techniques. And then I would also like to think about what has happened to the content we teach, because we want to make sure that our students, when they graduate, they are equipped with relevant skills, knowledge, and understanding of how to be collaborators or co-creators, or they know exactly what they would do once they go to the industry. Most of them go to the industry, or maybe policy making as well. So look at the content very carefully and always update the content based on what we find. So that's the second thing we try to do as much as possible. And also thinking about teaching, then going into the strategy, the teaching strategy we have been talking about. We all know UK higher education landscape is not that lucrative anymore because we do face challenges. So then how can we capitalize on our limited resources to offer the best to our students? And to think about creatively, I think they're working on a lot on executive education and strategies around executive education, and even how to think about our marketing. And like for us, for Birkbeck, we have been thinking about our marketing strategies, like then going into think about students, what are their needs? How can we incorporate that into our overall teaching strategy? So that has been changing dramatically based on what we learn through our research on entrepreneurship as well as innovation and, well, my field, co-creation. So we co-create the strategies, we co-create the classroom, we co-create the learning. So that's it.
Well, if you are fortunate enough to be given a role of responsibility, you should be doing something with your role. Huh? And academics tend to be smart people. Students, they don't only go to a university to get a degree. Yeah? So what they are both looking for is a meaningful challenge. So if you're in this role of being a dean, a university administrator, give them a challenge and make innovation the mission of the university, the mission of your business school, the mission of the unit you're responsible for. I was fortunate enough to have seen this through 3 institutions. 15 years ago, 10 years ago, sustainable innovation was a new thing. And I said, okay, that's what that business school is going to be known for. So let's work together on it. Then it was about powering sustainable transitions for better lives. And academics came up with wonderful ideas, and they didn't just want to apply them in their research, but also in the classroom. And in the world post-2008, post-global financial crisis, the students we educate have become the cleanup crew for whatever went wrong then. How much more has happened since then? How much more cleaning up needs to be done? I think if you tell students that, they want to get engaged in that. And Muthu and Tim have very eloquently described what can be done in the classroom. I think we can also do as academics, going beyond that and offer experiences outside the classrooms, giving students challenges. Well, I've come across a wonderful example where students are taken out of the class for 1 week. They're given a challenge, something to do with a sustainable issue in front of their door. So get the city centre cleared of plastics, work with the stakeholders, and then you pitch to the city council at the end of the week your suggestions for change. This gives students, gives academics and practitioners who are engaged an opportunity to effect some change. COVID was horrid, but it has also given us, we talked about that earlier, stop sharing, an opportunity to work across borders. In our case, this resulted in a lovely little extracurricular experience about social entrepreneurship in Kenya as an online course across boundaries that will have some tangible output. We talked about facilitating entrepreneurship through exciting engagement in the classroom. What you can also do is to run these programs outside the classrooms, to give actually students the opportunities through placements, summer school experience, to graduate with their own business. It might also be a social business. I think there are lots of opportunities for us to embed that into our daily work, into education, by simply, well, giving us a challenge that has a purpose. Thank you.
Really appreciate the emphasis on giving students a challenge and then empowering them to be able to go out and solve problems that exist in society. So thank you all for that. I'd like to open up the floor to questions from you all or people online.
So I'm not an academic. I work on a daily basis on technology. I'm a technology company. And I'm being very rude now. So innovation for them is money. Yeah, we go down to that. I innovate because I realize the business model, somehow some consultancy company, the idea that the business model works. And therefore I push this technology. And I push towards us as individuals, the value chain and the ecosystem. I push the technology towards someone who does not understand anything about it, does not have the instruments of dealing with this technology. You mentioned, Martin, about AI, and I give you plenty of examples. No organization, no have a clue about what machine learning is. They do not have the money to invest because all the people from machine learning, they're going to work in Google. So my question to you is sometimes in dealing with all of you, I see all the studies you have said towards policymakers, the co-creation aspect, the collaboration. I do not see the analysis of where this innovation goes and how it had to go, at what speed, and how we need to deal with it. Because from a technology point of view, I can give you plenty of examples of situations in which technology is just pushed. 2016, 17 blockchain fever, 5G fever, now we have the ML fever, and so on. So what do we do in that direction?
Thank you. I think that's a great question. So we haven't talked about it, but then there is a stream of literature that talks about user-centric co-creation. So rather than pushing the technology, you work with users to better understand their needs and then to come up with the technology or co-develop the technology. But I do understand, especially in those emerging digital fields, the technologies are changing so rapidly, even it would be difficult to understand the users. And even users may find it difficult to conceptualize what the technology could do for them. So I fully understand the dilemma there. However, in terms of the academic side of it, there is this concept of user-centric co-creation, but then there is a gap, as you could see, in relation to these highly changing technologies where users even have got no clue, or potential users have got no clue as to what the technology could do. So in that sense, perhaps that's where we really need to think that would be a gap in our knowledge to better understand or apply that knowledge in the context of changing technology domain to better articulate how we, rather than moving away from technology push to user-centric and then co-create in that space. So
yeah, can I just add, I think it is a really important question. We did some work a number of years ago now looking at productivity, and actually businesses don't want to know about productivity in terms of productivity. So the question really became, how do you talk about productivity without using the P word? And I guess the kind of question that you're alluding to there, and much of the work that we've done, we've been working with professional services firms looking at adoption and diffusion of these technologies and how you actually begin to think about it. And the first thing that I'd say is perhaps it's a fairly obvious finding, I would suggest, and I think that it was in your question as well, which is the technology is not the problem here. The problem is around the individuals, it is around the organizations that inhibit the adoption, don't understand the adoption, can't express the opportunity and the risk that is associated with the investment often. And so I think that innovation research has a really important role to play on that side. Innovation research isn't technology policy driven research on every occasion. I think that the user co-creation piece is interesting, but I think kind of more than that, it's about really trying to get into how do we help people understand and see and make the most of the technologies that exist. The other thing that I'd say that I think we've seen over the last kind of probably only 18 months, 2 years, maybe a little bit longer, is that from the funders' perspective, there is now an impetus to try and fund non-academic partners in that co-creation process. We're involved with an adoption accelerator at the moment in legal and accounting to try and help demystify and de-risk what the technology can do. And I think that this is where it becomes so important, where I would say this, obviously being in a business school, but where business school academics should be collaborating with the technologists that exist around the university to make those projects come to life. The technology is not the answer, the social science isn't the answer, but actually where we're seeing the intersection of these, I really think that this is where there's huge opportunity. How do we help individuals, organizations, and society realize that potential? Because on both sides, that there is an opportunity to be had.
Yeah, and I think building on this and what we had said earlier about innovation in the classroom, I think what we are trying to do, well, I'm currently in a specialized university that offers business and technology. And what we want to do is to integrate those trends. So you have business savvy engineers as the graduates and tech savvy business graduates. So there's a mutual understanding that can help adoption of technologies in certain areas. But I also wanted to say, and maybe we haven't emphasized that enough, even though we spoke about sustainability, is that there may be technological developments you don't want to see come to fruition. And over the last 15, 20 years, there has been work in this area around the precautionary principle, around where regulation can have an impact and drive responsible adoption of technology. And I think this mustn't be forgotten, and maybe that's a topic for a celebration of 30 years of CIMR, a little bit in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Okay, sorry. Hi, I'm Rosa. I wanted to ask this question before, but it works seamlessly with Martin's point. So, a lot of I know most of you that are here, I know in the team, hello, it's Rosa speaking. Sounds a lot like, positive outcome bias, everything we're talking a lot about everything is new, novelty is great, co-creation is fantastic, and there's always just going forward with new things. I'd like the panel to consider, how do we, with all this novelty and not thinking about mistakes of the past or things that we don't want to repeat, how do we match, this kind of drive for novelty with learning from the past?
So Rosa, I'd say, and I guess kind of the point's been made about experimentation is that there will always be failure with innovation. The failure to learn is the failure to progress. And I think that it is a case of trying to understand within any area of, it's obviously harder within government. I think we're seeing it increasingly within Innovate UK. That willingness to experiment and really kind of identify what works means that we are constantly part of a kind of a learning culture. And I think that how we continue to develop that, how we continue to kind of feed that in, whether we're talking about co-creation or collaboration, I think that we will always see kind of phrases that come and go, but ultimately it's really about trying to say this is the next version that in itself is a learning. So for me, co-creation has facets which build on collaboration and engagement and take it to the next level. And I think that in itself demonstrates a level of learning. It's not about trying to come up with something new. And personally, I get worried when we talk about novelty, because novelty comes and goes, but learning that reflects is something that builds, and it's that building that we need to continue to focus on. And I think the reason why doing it with policymakers, with stakeholders is so good, because we're building that understanding on both sides of the spectrum.
I fully agree with Tim, and also thank you very much, Professor, for highlighting it. So it's about what works, as Tim said, what doesn't work, and also understanding which objectives to be achieved through which mechanism. Because if we just try to use all these novel technologies or novel mechanisms to achieve everything, it doesn't work. So it is to be mindful, it is to understand what works, what doesn't work, and then especially looking into what doesn't work. And also then think about, could it create opportunities in terms of changing and then adapting, and then look into different other mechanisms, other types of stakeholders, other types of beneficiaries. So looking at it in that perspective. So I fully agree with you. And also it's constant evolution and constant change. I do remember once I made a presentation about the UK's policy landscape. And then I said, initially we had this policy where we tried to support universities, and then we thought that automatically the output would be translated into marketable products and services. That didn't work. And then we moved into technology push and technology market pull approaches. Again, we realized something is missing because these are two extremes. Then we went into innovation policies, where we talked about how we could bring universities and businesses together. But again, we were talking about knowledge exchange and knowledge transfer. So likewise, we were talking about what didn't work, then we went into the other phase. And someone asked that critical question. So we have been changing things. How do you know the one that you talk about would work? So that was a killer question. So I'm like, yes, we are learning through our process. At least understanding what doesn't work itself a learning. And it's a positive thing. At least we know that we cannot use it in that specific context. Also, what doesn't work doesn't mean that it doesn't work at every context with respect to every actor. But it might not work in relation to a specific context, in relation to a specific actor. So looking at that negativity from a slightly more positive perspective, it's a learning, it's an evolution, and an unanswered question as well, where we would end up in. Thanks also for asking that question.
Well, I'm getting to the age when you see and witness things happening again, all over. So we spoke about ecosystems, systems of innovation. It just takes 30 years and then you see the same thing coming back, all right in new bottles. But if you think 30 years back, this was pretty much a conversation amongst academics. Then people looked at what's happening in the region, involved some stakeholders. And now you have policymakers taking sort of a living lab approach, having a conversation, engaging. And I think there is a difference there. I'm currently based in an engineering school. I'm a social scientist, a business researcher in an engineering school. We mentioned trial and error before. That's the engineering approach. You just want to rein it in ever so much that not too big mistakes can happen in the future.
My line of work, I do policy, so failure is not in our language.
Exactly. Yeah.
We have time for one more question.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much, all of you, Martin, Muthu, and Tim. I mean, the topic of this workshop is about future studies. So in your view, in terms of curriculum, what new MSc, what new undergraduate degree on innovation and entrepreneurship you could see coming up?
Well, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I like the point of Tim that said it's not about innovation, it's about learning. So when it comes to learning, what is new in terms of studies? I mean, we have to develop new curriculum here. We have quite a bit. I know Martin for way back. He was influential in building some curriculum back then, 20 years ago. But what about now?
I mean, my position would, sorry, my position would be that it almost comes back down to Rosa's point about novelty. I think if we're thinking about the workforce of the future, we need to think about the skills that they need, not the degree title that they need. So one of the things that we're actively doing is building analytics into all of our programs. So everyone will leave understanding analytics in data, and we've revalidated programs to see that as a transition, because they're the skills that the stakeholders we're working with in our program design are saying that they want in their graduates of tomorrow that they're not getting in their graduates of today. And I think that the key is to keep listening and talking, because I think that we could have a degree program, and we've got one in business analytics, and that's fine for those graduates that want a business analytics title, but actually it's about more than that. And it's not just about giving analytics to those that want to study analytics. It's about saying, if you are graduating from a business school or from a university, and these are the attributes and the skills that the employers need, how do we marry that up moving forward? And I think it was Martin made the point earlier, and it certainly relates to his previous point about the kind of the business and management academic in an engineering school, which is we need to think about how, certainly to my mind, entrepreneurship and innovation studies enriches other disciplines. And I don't mean how do you do an elective that is on entrepreneurship and innovation. I mean, how do you embed so those graduates take away the kind of the pedagogic underpinnings of innovation, creativity, enterprise from the work that they're doing, even if they're not in the business school. And I think that is a big challenge for universities and university leaders to continue to grapple with.
If I may contribute very quickly, yeah, I fully agree with what Tim said about the new skills, and also thinking about what sort of new skills are required for different disciplines, that emerging ones like digitalization, AI, and then sustainability. The skills required for these different disciplines are different, and also interdisciplinarity. And then look into our students, and then to make sure that they are enriched and equipped with tools, skills, knowledge, network, and resources required to address these future challenges. I know that we are running out of time, so I'll just stop there.
So I must be then very quick. Huh? Good. I think we've done the job by integrating innovation in the curriculum across the board, not business schools, but across the university. I think that's really important. I believe in project work. Give a project to a student, then they start studying, then let them develop that over the course of a master's, for instance, and take the project through all the courses they are taking. And there will be a fundamentally different amount of learning and insight developed. Apart from that, it's not just about future skills, which I completely agree with, they must be integrated, but it's also about not forgetting the good old skills. With all the technologies, you don't want to have mindless adopters. You want to have critical thinkers who know what they're doing, and they know when they pursue something and when they stop doing something. And I think that's a mission we in higher education have. We had it, we will have it in the future, we mustn't forget about it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Tim. I'm afraid I can't give you a full break. I have another one as well. That was terrific. Thank you, Tim. It's really good. Thank you.
We take 15 minutes
Thanks for having me.
for tea and coffee and reconvene 20 to 4, please. We have 10 minutes.
Perfect.
I'm going to
I think you should come up with new questions. What do you do in your class?